Hey, how's it going? I'm IlaGolden and welcome to Ila Reads. It had been a glorious summer's day. Her friends had been as energetic and full of life as she'd wanted to feel. It had been 3 months since her last conversion therapy treatment, and her doctors had been insistent she get out and do something, anything to prove her treatment had been successful this time. She had her doubts. This time didn't feel any different from any of the previous failures. But even so, she still wanted to believe, needed to believe, that maybe the doctors were right and those feelings she had were just because she expected it to fail. The familiar dull ache along her spinal column had started soon after they'd set out. She told herself again and again it was just in her head, or that maybe she just wasn't used to this level of exercise. When they'd entered the forest, she'd insisted her friends go on ahead of her, told them she'd meet them at their chosen picnic spot as soon as she could, and to wait for her before they ate. Her friends had been reluctant to agree. Nia, her best friend, had tried to insist he stay with her, but she refused. Her parents had never been allowed to coo over her in concern, and she'd never appreciated her friends doing it. Her life was far from perfect, and those imperfections made her stubbornly independent, which often led to her making stupid decisions she knew she would regret the second she'd made them. Why did this have to be one of those times? Almost as soon as her friends were out of sight, the dull ache had turned sharp and nasty. It felt like someone was stabbing the space between each vertebrate with long, thin needles. She dropped her pace a little and aimed towards a tree stump she could sit on and rest. Rest! That was all she needed to fix this. It had to be. After all, just because every time she'd felt this pain before meant her conversion therapy had been rejected, didn't mean this time would be the same. She gave a heavy sigh as she made it to the tree stump and sank down with a strange kind of relief. The pain eased almost instantly, and relief flooded through her. Maybe the doctors were right, and her expectations that this treatment would fail was making her worry unnecessarily. She took several deep, calming breaths in as she took in the scenic forest around her. The sunlight danced through the leaves with each passing breeze. The air was heavily fragranced with flowers, and the birds sang in melodies only a nymph with an affinity for music could truly appreciate. Letting out another heavy sigh, and convinced she really was going to be okay now, she forced herself back to her feet and took a few staggered paces forward. She'd had more than enough physio in her life to know she should steady herself before continuing. Unfortunately, that was easier said than done. No matter how hard she tried, her body wouldn't follow the instructions she was giving it. Fear beat hard through her chest, and she strained to keep the panic at bay. Panic wouldn't help this situation. She had to remain calm. She had to. Rustling in the trees around her caught her attention. Glancing about, she wondered if maybe one of her more energetic friends had come back to check on her. They'd probably reached the picnic spot by now and were just wondering what had happened to her. I was as far as she got through what she wanted to say when a sharp pain rushed through her body. Gasping at the pain, and with her balance already heavily shaken, she collapsed to the ground. It was at this point she realized the rustling around her was too loud to belong to just one person. If she was being honest with herself, she'd have to admit it was too loud to be made by the number of friends she'd had with her. So maybe it was a large group of tree-dwelling animals, a very large group, an impossibly large group, because if it was a friend of hers, hell, if it was anyone capable of intelligent thought, they would have come help her by now, wouldn't they? With all the strength she could muster, she turned herself over and stared up at the treetops. With the sun now almost directly in her eyes, there wasn't a whole lot she could see. Worse still, the pain in her spine was making her vision blurry and dark. Still, there was nothing she could do except lie there and wait for one or more of her friends to come looking for her. There was also no doubt in her mind now. Her latest conversion therapy treatment had failed, and, as she lay there wishing the pain would abate at least a little, she knew with absolute certainty she would not allow them to put her through this again. This was it. It didn't matter who thought what, or what kind of future this decision would leave her with. She was done. The shadowy shape of an upper body and head appeared in her vision. Squinting against the sunlight, she lifted an arm to shade her face, but even doing this wouldn't allow her a clear image of the person staring down at her. Near? She could hear the dry pain in her own voice. The figure said nothing. Instead, they knelt down, lifted her head and pressed something against her lips. Before she had a real chance to work out what was going on, she found herself drinking the purest and freshest tasting water she'd ever known. Strange sensation moved through her, like she was able to feel the water moving down her throat, into her stomach, and out towards the pain in her spine. It caused her to splutter a little, in a mixture of shock and confusion. Instantly the figure jerked back, taking whatever it was she'd been given away from her. They then rapidly got to their feet and disappeared into the shadows of the trees above. The pain in her back eased away to nothing, but before she could really make sense of what had just happened, she heard her friends' worried voices calling for her. Within minutes they were there at her side, and she found herself being carried back to the nearby city where they lived. Later, not one of them would tell her they'd seen anyone else in the forest that day, and a few would question whether or not pain and shock had caused her to hallucinate. But despite all the doubts and questions, she knew the stranger she could barely see, the one who eased her pain, had been real, and no one would ever convince her to believe otherwise. No fair, Pico, no loud use wings. Cynth's voice carried across the field from where he and his sister were playing. He's right, Piccolo. Cleo's response grated through her. You shouldn't use an unfair advantage like that. He's only little. Echoe didn't disagree with her statement, but the fact that she was the one making it made her impatiently tap her fingers against the arm of her wheelchair. Who did Cleo think she was talking to other people's children like that? Here. Nia leaned over the back of her chair, his almost waist-length ash-blonde hair falling onto her as he did. I thought you could use something to drink. It's your favourite, strawberry and cream delight. He all but forced the milkshake bottle into her hands. I also got caramel for Pico, honey and vanilla for Synth, and mocha for Cleo. His expression was carefree and almost lively as he made his way around the chair and sat down on the picnic blanket. And let me guess, you got yourself a cherry berry deluxe, she couldn't help but tease. Or is it chocolate surprise this week? Variety makes life exciting, so why stick to one flavour, he laughed. And for what it's worth, I went with coffee cream. New flavour? Of course, and everything new must be tried at least once. This time they both laughed, and for a moment Echoe could almost forget they were both supposed to be responsible adults, holding down jobs and raising a family together. Well, almost together. They'd been best friends since forever, close as anything, so in their late teens it seemed only natural for them to see if maybe there was more to their friendship than that. There wasn't. It was a conclusion they'd come to pretty quickly, and fortunately by that time Echoe was expecting Piccolo, and sticking together just felt like the right thing to do. Again, it wasn't, and by the time Synth showed up a few years later, they were more like best friends house-sharing than an actual couple. They each took their own room, each living separate but connected lives, and were each happy enough to live on in this manner until Cleo turned up and ruined everything. Those kids of yours are such a handful, Cleo panted as she flopped down onto the picnic blanket. I don't know how you could possibly cope, Echoe. I managed just fine, thank you. Echoe did her best not to sound like she was talking through gritted teeth. Here, Nia, oblivious to the tension as always, handed Cleo her shake bottle. Oh, my favourite! Her voice was filled with sickly sweet tones. You're just too good for me. She leant in to kiss him, and Echoe couldn't help but roll her eyes. She did not resent Nia dating. In fact, she was glad he could find someone to love who appeared to love him back. But why in the name of all that was natural did that person have to be a sticky little pixie with red and black short wavy hair who made up for her lack of height by being the most condescending being in all existence? Nia deserved better. She just wished she could convince him of that without looking like some kind of jealous ex. Mama, Mama! Synth rushed towards them with his hands held out. Look what I found! Even before he reached them, Echoe could see the large green and purple feather he was holding. The wider end of the feather was almost circular, with an eye-like shape patterned onto it, making it impossible to doubt what kind of creature it had come from. I didn't know there were peacocks in this field. Cleo glanced about as if the very idea of a peacock being anywhere near her was somehow offensive. Well, we are fairly close to the zoological park. Nia tilted his head thoughtfully. Perhaps one of them wandered out. I hope it wandered out yesterday and wandered back in today. She turned her nose up. They're nasty, vicious little creatures when they want to be. Poor little Clee. I can't imagine what you went through as a kid. He pulled her into his arms. But they're really not so bad. You can't let one little bad experience. It wasn't just one little bad experience, she sounded indignant. I told you. I know. By this time, Synth had reached them and was showing Echo the feather. You know, she ruffled his shoulder-length strawberry blonde hair. We could use this for one of our collages. What do you think? Uh-huh, he grinned up at her. Big one. He stretched his arms out in an attempt to show scale. Of course a big one, she laughed. And Pico can help too. What do you say? Yay! With that, he bounced back off to where his sister was still playing, calling her name like it was going out of style. Echo couldn't help but chuckle as she watched him. He was even more energetic than she remembered Near being at that age, and apart from the reddish hues in his hair, he was a spitting image of his patch. Well, almost. There was one more thing apart from his hair colour which set them apart. Echo suddenly found herself studying the large, delicate, dragonfly-like wings folded against Near's back. Piccolo had a gorgeous set just like them, which wasn't uncommon for Ashtar two-tones. Wings were a dominant trait in most fairy bloodlines, and it was rare for an Ashtar to be born without them. But the wings Synth had been born with were small and malformed. It was part of a condition originally known as wingless fairy syndrome, but had been renamed Icarus wings when a then well-known balancer had pointed out that technically fairies or Ashtar with the condition weren't completely wingless. Echo never had a problem with Synth's condition. After all, she'd grown up being different and turned out just fine, so why shouldn't he? Near didn't mind it much either. But then again, one of his brothers suffered from the same condition. It wasn't life-threatening, and it didn't need to be cured. However, it did come with some possible social and learning difficulties, which could become more evident as Synth grew up. It was something to keep an eye on, to be aware of but not obsess over, unless you were listening to the way Cleo banged on about it. Then you'd have thought it was a death sentence, something which needed to be determined sooner rather than later in order to give him the best quality of life possible. It was what she was like about everything, stubborn and persistent until she got her own way, like getting Near to move out of his family home and into her poxy little flat. I think we should make tracks now, X. Near broke her out of her train of thoughts. Cleo is worried about peacocks. You don't mind, do you? No, it's fine. I was thinking of leaving about this sort of time anyway. She quickly checked her watch. It's a school day tomorrow, and I don't want them eating right before bed. I'll get the kids if you help Echo clear everything away. He shot Cleo a look. Then we'll walk them home, okay? Of course, she batted her eyes at him. Anything for you. Echo gritted her teeth and forced a smile onto her face. The thought of having to spend any time alone with Cleo was just irksome. So, Echo, how's that play of yours going? Cleo tried her best to sound interested as she began gathering up their picnic things. We've just finished the final week and there have been talks about possibly doing it again next summer. Only possibly? I'm still finding my footing as a producer and I'm still not sure I want to be tied down to certain types of projects. You don't seem to want to be tied down to anything. There was a clear tone in Cleo's voice. What's that supposed to mean? Echo shot her an indignant look. Well, you seem to want to do everything. In the time I've known you, you've been an assistant director, a writer, a director, and just recently a producer too. And sometimes you seem to do everything all at the same time. Either you're a workaholic, you don't like hiring people, or you really don't like what you're doing and you just don't want to be tied down to any of it. I like what I do. She felt defensive. I wouldn't do it else. And for the record, filling more than one role isn't uncommon in my circles, especially when budgets are small. It's something to be taken into consideration when choosing a project, whether it be mine or someone else's. Whatever, Cleo rolled her eyes. I just wish you'd work on something with one of those male-heavy casts. You know, those actors can be quite the catch. I'm not trying to catch anyone. She narrowed her gaze as she placed the blanket Cleo handed her into her backpack. And why not? Your house is too big to just have you and the kids rattling around it. Her eyes glinted in that way they did when she was trying to matchmake. You must be lonely when you're not at work, and it would be nice for you to have a companion to come home to, love interest or otherwise, someone to help around the house. Well, I had one of those, and you were more than welcome to move in with us. Oh, but that would have been so weird, don't you think? And I know Near does his best to help you still, bless him, but he can't be there all the time. And nor could anyone I ended up with, she glared. And even if I did have someone else in my life, it wouldn't stop Near from coming around to help out. Bigelow and Synth are still his children, you know. And he's my oldest, closest, and dearest friend, and I'm his. Nothing you do or say will change that. And I wasn't suggesting it would either. Cleo's voice was tight. I was just thinking it would be nice for you to have someone. Well, that's for me to decide, Cleo, not you. Enjoyed what you've heard so far? Please consider subscribing to find out when the next part's being released. Thanks for watching. See ya!